So there's a superstition in the theater world, some of you may know this, that says that the worse the dress rehearsal goes, the better the performance. Now, this might just be a way to keep the cast and crew from freaking out when things go completely and utterly wrong the night before a show opens. But I think there's something to be said about how a story doesn't come fully alive until an audience is present. There's something to be said that a show isn't complete until the atmosphere is charged with the energy of the audience and the expectations that they bring. That's when a story really comes alive. No matter how good or how bad a dress rehearsal goes, they are important because they get all of the players on the same page. It's a time to work out all the kinks and to make sure that everyone knows their marks. But as necessary as they are, dress rehearsals can't replicate the energy of a full house. They can't anticipate the variety of people that will be there or what experiences and stories that they'll bring with them. Story only comes alive when it resonates with the audience. It takes on a life of its own as each person connects with the story in their own unique way. And that's what we find in our scripture reading this morning. This morning's scripture reading is a dress rehearsal of sorts, if you think about it. Because the part that we read is just a small part in a larger narrative that ends with Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. And if we had kept reading in this story as Jesus performs this final miracle in the Gospel of John, we would have found a lot of elements that echo what will take place on Easter morning, just a short time for when this part of the story takes place. For one, there's a group of mourning women. There's a stone-covered tomb. There's a shroud of linen wrappings, and most of all, there's an appearance of a man who was dead but is now alive. The raising of Lazarus is a dress rehearsal of sorts. Because by raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus sets the stage for his own resurrection down the road. Here, he gives his followers the script so that they're ready for when he's no longer there to help explain what's going on. This is a dress rehearsal. In the part that we read, we meet Jesus on his way to Lazarus' hometown. It's been 4 days since Lazarus has died. He has been in the tomb for 4 days. According to Jewish custom, the spirit hovered around the body for 3 days. So Lazarus is really dead. And as Jesus makes his way to the house where the mourners are gathered, he's met on the road. First by Martha, and then by Mary. Lazarus' two sisters who had sent word to Jesus when Lazarus first fell sick. That happens before the section that we read. They'd sent word and said, "Come, Lazarus, your friend, the one that you love, is sick. Come and help him." And Jesus didn't come until now, 4 days later. And hearing how Jesus was on his way to them, Martha runs out to meet him. Not waiting for him to get to their house, she rushes up to him, and her first words, if you remember, are an accusation. "If you had only been here, my brother would not have died." And just a little bit later, Mary also goes out to greet Jesus. And she greets him with the same words as her sister. "Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died." If only. Mary and Martha's lament hangs heavy in the air. If only you had been there. If only you had come. If only you had done something different. If only. We hear their cries. These cries that echo in our own hearts because we know what it's like to beat ourselves up with if onlys and what ifs. We know what it's like to demand answers like Martha. When tragedy strikes and death comes too soon, we cry out and we ask, "Where were you, God? If only you had been here." And we also know what it's like to be Mary, to fall down out of grief and exhaustion, to fall at the feet of Christ and be able to do nothing more than weep, to weep inconsolably. And I read this part of the story because I love how Jesus meets each of the women with what they need most in that moment. To Martha, he offers a word of hope. And to Mary, he offers her his tears. Despite her accusation, Martha clings to what she knows to be true about Jesus. "If you had been here, my brother would never have died," she starts. "Yet even now in my grief, in my confusion, in my anger, even now I am sure that God will give you whatever you ask." And Jesus assures her. He gives her that word of hope, saying that her brother will rise again. But she cuts him off. I know, Jesus, I know all about the resurrection in the last days. This is something we know full well. Martha is not so easily placated in the here and now. But Jesus' next words to her have echoed through time, and they resonate with our own story and our own hearts. We often hear these words read at funerals. "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me will live, even if they die. And those who are alive and believe in me will never die. I am the resurrection and the life." All too often, we only hear the first part of Jesus' statement. When loved ones pass away, we take some small comfort like Martha in the hope of resurrection on the last day. But the second part of Jesus' claim is life. Not just in the hereafter, but in the here and the now. I am the resurrection and I am the life for you. Last week, we lifted up our responsibility as stewards of the future generations. We celebrated the blessing of God who has entrusted to our care those children in our ministry programs, in our agape program, the children that we meet in our daily lives. We've been entrusted to be stewards of the future. But Jesus' claim to be the resurrection and the life turns our attention to what it means to be stewards of the story, of the gospel story, of our own story in the here and the now. What does it mean to live out that resurrection and that life? Which is a fitting reading for us on this All Saints Sunday. As we gather to remember the saints of our community who have passed from this world into the next, we celebrate how they helped us to become the people that we are today. We honor how they are part of our story, and we remember that we're all part of the ongoing and ever unfolding story of God's grace and love in the world. Beloved of God, we are called to life, to live fully and deeply in the assurance of God's love. Now, unlike her sister Martha, Mary doesn't follow up her lament of Jesus' absence with any declaration of faith. After rushing up to Jesus and falling at his feet, she can barely get the words out, "If you were only here," before she's overcome with grief and breaks down weeping. With tears rolling down her cheeks, with her chest heaving with the pain of a broken heart, Jesus does a beautiful thing. He doesn't offer her platitudes. He doesn't offer her words of comfort. He doesn't try to get her to stop crying. He simply gathers her in his arms and cries with her. Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, but it speaks volumes. Jesus wept. He wept to the point that the crowd began to murmur and to marvel at how much Jesus must have loved Lazarus to be crying like that. It wasn't just his love for Lazarus. It was his love for Martha and for Mary. It was his love for all who grieve and mourn. Our tears are a powerful testament to having loved deeply and fully, to having been loved deeply and fully. And our tears are a holy and acceptable response to losing someone that we love. In Jesus' response to Mary, we discover the sacredness of our own tears and the beauty of our own story. But if you remember, this was just a dress rehearsal. All Mary can do here is to cry. But soon another set of Marys will stand before another tomb. And with tears in their eyes, one Mary will meet the one whose body she came to anoint. And she'll recognize him when he calls her name, and she'll run away to tell the story of Christ's resurrection. The words that Jesus spoke to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life," will take on new meaning down the road in the light of another empty tomb. This is what it means to be stewards of the story, to live out Christ's declaration of being the resurrection and life in the world. At some point or another, we'll all find ourselves in the shadow of death. Death of ones that we love. And we'll cry out from the depths of our despair, and it's there, in the moment of our despair, that God meets us and gives us what we need most. To the one who needed a word, Jesus gave a word, and to the one who needed more than that, Jesus gave his tears. In his response to Martha, we find the strength to keep living, and in his response to Mary, we find one who weeps with us in our pain and holds us in our sorrow. And in the midst of our grief, we hear the whisper of the holy promise, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me will live even if they die, and those who are alive and believe in me will never die." Do you believe me? And even though we stand in the valley of the shadow of death, slowly Jesus' words bring us back to life. And slowly we begin to live the answer to Jesus' question, "Do you believe me?" We begin to live not without starts and stutters, but slowly taking stock of where we are and surveying where to go from here. And slowly we begin to live life anew in the promise of the resurrection and the life, carrying with us the light of those who have gone before us, being good stewards of everything that they have entrusted to our care, to the story that we have. And we practice being good stewards of this story when we share it with the world. When we share our stories of gladness and our stories of grief. When we tell the story of God's grace, we live fully into the story of our lives. This morning, as we gather to celebrate communion and to remember all the saints that have gone before us, we remember that we are part of this larger story. We remember those everyday saints whose love lives in us still. So as we move into this time of reflection, I invite you to come forward to this table, to light a candle in memory of someone whose light still shines in your life, someone who is still part of your story. So as we stand and we sing of